Hello, welcome to Bitesize Guitar. I'm Reese and welcome to your very first guitar lesson. So if you're a complete beginner, here's the place to start. Today we're going to be looking at some of the names of the various bits of the guitar so that you know what I'm talking about in other videos on this channel. We're also going to look at how the guitar is tuned and why it's tuned that way, and what that means for us when we're learning particular chord shapes on the guitar. I'm then going to take you through how to play a few of the basic chord shapes so that you can start to put some of those together, and we'll have a little bit of a look as well at a strumming pattern so you can get your right hand moving, practicing playing both down and up strums. Okay, so let's start by just demystifying some of the jargon that you're likely to hear in this and other lessons when we talk about the guitar. So you may already know that we have 6 strings on our guitar, so we're going to come back to those in just a moment. But we also have the neck, which the strings run up and down, and if you look on the neck you can see we've got a series of boxes, and we call these the frets. So this first box we would call fret 1, fret 2, fret 3, all the way up, as far up as your guitar goes. We have the sound hole if you're playing an acoustic, and if you're playing an electric you're likely to have pickups there instead. Here we have the bridge, and up here we have the nut. At the end of the guitar you're going to find your tuning pegs. Now these are really important because these are how you're going to manipulate the tuning of your guitar. Now if you've got a guitar tuner, that's going to make your life a lot easier for getting your guitar in tune. So obviously if your strings aren't in tune, it doesn't matter if you're playing the right things, it's going to sound wrong. So let's take a look at the names of our strings. So when it comes to the strings on our guitar, we actually give each of them a number. They're numbered from our first all the way down to the 6th. And that's from the thinnest string here all the way down to the thickest string here. Now the thinnest string on the guitar is this one here, and that makes the highest pitch sound of any of the strings when played what we will call open, which just means I'm not using my left hand at all, I'm just playing the string kind of in its natural state. So when I play the first string open, that's the highest open string on the entire guitar. And likewise when I play this 6th string, that's the lowest open string on the entire guitar. Now both of those guitars are actually tuned to the same note, just octaves apart. So this high string is an E, and this low string is an E. You can hear, I hope, that they are the same note, but one is low and one is high. Okay, so we know we've got an E string at either end of the guitar. Now because this is the highest note and this is the lowest note, sometimes when we are talking about the guitar, beginners can get very confused because we're actually moving up in pitch when we travel downwards spatially. So if we were on this string, say, and I said let's move up a string, that could be quite confusing because you think, well, there isn't another string above this one. But we're always talking in terms of pitch when we talk about up and down, low or high on the guitar. So the highest string on the guitar is actually the one that is lowest spatially on the neck, this high E here. If we want to move down a string, I'm moving down in pitch onto this second one here, even though I'm moving up physically. So once you get your head around that it's a bit just back to front, upside down, you should be well on your way. So let's take a look at how the guitar is tuned now. So as we already know, we have a low E and a high E. So if we move up from our low E, we have an A. We then have the D string, the G string, the B string, and then we're back to that high E. So E, A, D, G, B, E. Now you can obviously just sit and learn, and over time you'll absolutely come to know the names of those strings. Certainly if you're tuning a guitar every time you pick it up, you'll very quickly get used to what they're supposed to be. But quite often it's useful to come up with some kind of mnemonic or a little rhyme, depending on how easily you find that to remember. So probably the best one that any of my students have come up with is elephants and donkeys grow big ears. So if you just remember that elephants and donkeys grow big ears, you'll always remember the order of strings is E, A, D, G, B, E. So when we come to play the guitar, essentially we're always either playing the strings open or we're manipulating those pitches by placing our fingers on one of the relevant frets and pushing down. So if I want to play, say, the 2nd fret on the low E string, I'm going to push down on this 2nd fret here, anywhere within this 2nd box, and play that same string with my right hand, and you can hear the note changes from the open E to a different sound. This is an F sharp. Likewise, if I move up to, say, the 4th fret on the A, there's the open A, 4th fret on the A, would go to the 4th box up, play the same string, and you can hear there's the open A, and there's the 4th fret on the A. Now when we come to play chords, we're going to be playing a combination of frets, so we were going to put together little patterns where we fret certain strings and we leave other strings open, and then we would play everything in unison. Okay, so now that you know exactly what you should be tuning each string to, let's take a look at the left and right hand positions that are ideal for you as a beginner. Okay, so if we begin with the left hand, now realistically as a beginner, you just want to have it somewhere that feels comfortable and still facilitates you being able to reach all of the relevant notes that you're trying to play, whether that be for a scale or a chord or a riff, whatever it is you're trying to play. Now ideally we want our thumb to be behind the neck and our fingers in front of the neck obviously, and we should be using them kind of in tandem to allow us to sort of pinch the neck of the guitar. So your thumb is just allowing you to apply pressure with the front fingers and kind of counterbalance that, if that makes sense. So with that in mind, you could have your thumb pretty much anywhere that feels comfortable to you. Obviously the further around I move it on the back of the neck, the more you can see that my fingers can reach up to the lower strings. If I've got my thumb all the way around here, it's a little bit harder, and certainly would be harder as a beginner to reach those bottom strings. But we also want to use our thumb a little bit for muting strings that we don't want to sound out when we're playing particular chords. So it is useful to have your thumb sort of tucked over a little bit so that you can decide whether you want to let a string ring out or mute it by kind of bringing your thumb over as a little pad to stop that string from vibrating. That being said, so long as it's comfortable for you, I wouldn't worry too much about your thumb or left hand positioning at this stage. So secondly, let's take a look at your right hand. Now there's a lot of different schools of thought, and I've certainly seen it all from people kind of coming all the way around the kind of bell of the guitar here to kind of sticking very rigidly here. Ideally, again, just like your left hand, you want to find a comfortable space that allows you a good range of motion. So I've been playing for a while. I quite like to keep my hand here on the bridge, and I'll play with a lot of the motion just coming from my wrist. Now you might find that that's a little bit restrictive kind of at this stage, but ideally if we can kind of get a little bit of a swing going. So you want something that doesn't feel like you're pushing too rigidly down and up. We want to be able to kind of find a pivot point, whether, as I say, that's your wrist resting on the bridge of the guitar, or whether that's like your elbow resting on the body, and we get a little bit more of that swing back and forth. Ideally we want to position our hand over the sound hole if you're playing an acoustic, or over your pickups, sort of equidistant between the end of the neck and that bridge. But again, like I say, you can kind of play around with it. You'll notice you get a slightly different tone where you allow your strum to fall. So at this stage there really isn't any right or wrong unless you're doing something particularly crazy. There's only really the most comfortable spot for you personally to be playing, and like I say, you want to find something that feels comfortable so that if you're uncomfortable you're less likely to want to practice, but that gives you a good range of motion so you can move both down and up when strumming the guitar, and also kind of good level of accuracy should you want to play like individual strings. So you don't want to be too far away from the guitar and be playing out all the time. So kind of try and minimize the amount of motion, but you also want to make sure that you've got a good range of motion both down and up when strumming or picking. Okay, so let's get started at looking at some chords. Now, the three chords I'm going to teach you are fairly basic open chords, which just mean that we are playing them using open strings at some point within the chord. So the first one we're going to take a look at is the E major chord. So what we're going to do is on the 6th E string, we're just going to leave that open. Now that note is already, as we know from our tuning, the open E string, so that's our root note of the chord. We come down to the A string, we're going to put our second finger onto the second fret of the A string. Moving on to the D string, you're going to put your third finger on the second fret, so right next to your second finger, but on the D string, second fret. And then on the G, we're going to put our first finger on the first fret, but keeping all of those fingers down together at the same time. So we've got open on the bottom E, second fret with our second finger on the A string, second fret with our third finger on the D string, and then first fret on the G string with our first finger, and then the top two strings we just leave open. Now the main thing you're going to have to watch out for is that you don't mute strings that you want to be open by having your fingers kind of passing over the top of them. It's very easy, particularly with this first finger, to fret that first fret there on the G, and maybe that sounds absolutely perfect, but if you come to the top two strings, you're going to find that this finger is catching on those two. So ideally you just want to slightly rotate your hand so that you create a little bit of a gap here, so that those two strings ring out nice and cleanly, even whilst we've got the rest of our chord shape down. So that's our E major chord. Okay, so let's take a look at our A major chord now. If we move down a string, we're actually going to completely bypass the bottom E string and not play it at all. So this comes back to what I was saying before. We might use our thumb here as a little muting pad to stop that string from ringing out, even if we do catch it whilst we're strumming. So we're going to start with open A. So again, that's our root note. And then we're going to put second finger on the second fret of the D string, first finger on the second fret of the G string, and third finger on the second fret of the B string. And the high E is once again just open. So we're at all the second frets on the D, G and B strings with our second, first and third finger respectively. So that's open on the A, second with my second finger on the D, first finger at the second on the G, and third finger on the second of the B. High E is then open. Now that might feel a little bit of a squash here, but it's just getting used to it and kind of messing around with the exact location of your fingers. You might find that you can move them up and down a little bit within the parameters of that second fret until they feel comfortable and they're giving each other enough space. Okay, lastly let's take a look at our D major chord. Very similar idea again. Now we're going to omit the bottom E string and the A string. So we start with our open D string. As you can see, we're always starting with the lowest notes that we're playing, the lowest string that we're playing I should say, is the root note of the chord that we're trying to play. So we start here on our open D. We're then going to put first finger on the second fret of the G string, third finger on the third fret now of the B string, and second finger on the second fret of the high E. So again we've got open D, first finger on the second fret of the G, third finger on the third fret of the B, and second finger on the second fret of the high E. So just 4 strings this time. Now if you're struggling at any point with getting the whole chord to ring out, you can absolutely focus on the bottom 2 strings of each chord. So when we're playing our E, you might find that you get a little kind of muting happening, particularly in the kind of higher reaches of the chord. So in that case you could focus on just getting the bottom 2 strings to ring out and gradually try and tighten up the rest of the chord so that you can play all 6 strings. Likewise for the A, you might find that you get some muting here, maybe these are all a little bit of a jumble, so we just focus on the bottom 2, getting them to ring out, and over time introduce the rest of the chord until we're playing all 5 strings. And with the D exactly the same thing, but this time we're obviously only playing 4 strings. What that will actually give you is the power chord version of each one of those chords. So power chords are basically chords that only involve two notes. They're the root note and the fifth note of that scale, whatever scale that we're drawing from to play the chord. So for our E, we're playing the root note and the fifth from an E major scale. What does that all mean? Basically, power chords are neither major nor minor. So they should sound kind of okay, not 100% accurate, over a major chord or a minor chord. But more importantly, it just gets your right hand moving. You can kind of begin to play some of the songs that maybe you've been looking at that use some of these chords. And over time, if you're playing them, you will tighten up the entire shape. Okay, so for the time being, let's assume that maybe you're finding all of those chord shapes relatively comfortable and you want to start to chain them together into a chord pattern. So we're going to play them in this order. We're going to play them the E major, then the A major, then the D, and then back down to A, and finishing on E major. It's all very well and good, but how do I change between them, you say? So what I want you to focus on is this finger, your first finger, because we're going to use that as a bit of an anchor. What I mean by that is that this finger never actually needs to leave this string. It's going to move up and down between the first and the second fret, but if I'm playing my E major chord, my first finger is here on the first fret of the G. When I move to my A, I simply move this finger up, and as it crosses that threshold into the second fret, I can bring my other two fingers in either side on the D and B strings, and we get an A major. When we go to the D, I can keep this finger exactly where it is. Maybe I move it slightly up the fret so that all of the other frets on the other strings are more kind of easily accessible. But then I'm going to add my second and third finger in at the third fret and the second fret on the high E. And there I have my D major. So again, that's E major. Take everything off but leave that first finger down. Then move that first finger up onto the second fret and bring everything else back in. Both fingers either side for your A major, remembering to mute your bottom E string. And then if we take everything else off, maybe shift that finger up a little bit and reintroduce your second and third finger on the top two strings for a D. And again, remembering to mute or just try and avoid hitting those bottom two strings. So let's try and chain those together. We're going to have an E, 2, 3, 4 to A, 2, 3, 4 to D, 2, 3, 4 back to A, 2, 3 and back to E. One more time, that's E major, 2, 3, 4, A, 2, 3, 4, D, 2, 3, 4, A, 2, 3, 4, E, 2, 3, 4. So by using this finger as an anchor, it's much harder for us to get lost when changing between chords. If you kind of take all of your fingers off, it's very, very easy to get lost when you're trying to find the relevant frets for the next chord, and maybe you make exactly the right shape, but in the wrong position, and we could end up with a D-looking shape that's in the middle of the guitar, or we move from an E to the A and we stay on the same strings. But if we keep this finger down, it kind of gives us a little bit of a landmark or a frame of reference so that we can start to chart the movement between each chord by the movement of our other fingers. In other words, we're kind of looking at what stays the same between certain chords and what changes, and using that to help us get smooth changes and remember our chords more efficiently. Okay, so I hope that that isn't too daunting. If that kind of feels like enough for now, then by all means pause this video and just get really comfortable with those three shapes, just single strummed and moving between them using that anchor as I've just described. But if you want to take it one step further, perhaps we could introduce the right hand and look at a strumming pattern to deliver those three chords in our progression. So the strumming pattern that we're going to look at is a really simple strumming pattern, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's easy, because what it's going to do is get your right hand moving both down and up, and more importantly playing both downward and upward strums. So what I want you to try and get used to is the fact that your right hand should never stop swinging. So you're always just kind of tick-tocking backwards and forwards, just down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. And what a strumming pattern essentially is figuring out which ones of those down and up beats you actually connect with the guitar on. So for example, if we play down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, I'm connecting connecting with the guitar on every downbeat and every upbeat. That's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... So that's pretty plain. So if we wanted to kind of zhuzh that up a little bit, we would omit certain down or up strums and include certain down or up strums, and that would give us a more varied pattern. So the pattern that we're going to take a look at goes something like this. It goes down, down, up, down, up. And again, that's down, down, up, down, up. But you'll notice that even though I'm only connecting with the guitar on certain beats, my right hand is consistently just swinging up and down. Like I said, it's just this pendulum effect. And I only connect with the guitar and with the chord that we're going to be playing when I'm saying specific beats. So we've got down, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, up. So let's hear what that sounds like on, say, our E major chord. So 1, 2, 3, 4, down, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, up. Now this strumming pattern is used on countless number of songs and is kind of a very general strumming pattern that will work on certain songs even if this strumming pattern wasn't what was used on the original recording. It's also, as I said, really useful for getting you used to playing both down and upward strums, as well as this concept of just kind of keeping your right hand very loose, sort of pivoting at the elbow here, and gradually we can kind of work towards using more of our wrist and just getting so that we've got this kind of pendulum motion, as I said, just down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. And then the strumming pattern is revealed by which kind of beats we connect with the guitar on and which we leave as either silence or just letting the chord ring out. So, finally, let's try putting all of our chords together in a progression using that strumming pattern. So again, we're going to be going from the E major to the A, to the D, back to the A, and back to the E. We're going to play that strumming pattern once on each chord, and we're going to use that first finger as our anchor to change between them. Now the only other thing that I would say at this point is absolutely feel free, this is kind of a little tip or little trick that I like to use and teach all of my students. When we're playing down, down, up, down, up, or 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and, there isn't really a great deal of time for us to change from this chord we're on to the next chord ready to start the next bar on beat 1. So what we can actually do is, rather than have a pause in between each bar, so 1, 2, 3, 4 and stop while I find the next chord, and then down, down, up, which can make what we're trying to practice feel very disjointed. It's far, far better to borrow a little bit of time from the bar you're currently playing in order to make that change very seamless and smooth so that we arrive at our next chord in time on the first beat of the next bar. Now how do we do that? So we're going to borrow some time from the bar we're in by making our move to the next chord on the final up or the final and beat of each bar essentially. So when I play down, down, up, down, up, that final up is where we're going to change. I like to think of this sometimes if you were a singer, it's almost like you're taking a breath before starting the next part of your verse, the next sentence if you like. So you kind of have down, down, up, down, 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 up. So you can think of it as a little breath before you continue into the next bar. So let's try putting all of that together. Now we're going to go really slow to begin with, and I'd encourage you to go as slow as you need to in order to make those transitions really smooth. But again, starting with our E, moving all the way down and then back up till we get back to the E, playing that strumming pattern one measure on each chord. It should sound something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, down, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, 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 up, down, 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 up, down, down, down. And you can see that you barely notice the fact that I'm moving before I'm kind of done with that chord, and essentially I'm releasing everything else that isn't that first finger on that final upbeat, so that... But you don't really notice that, particularly when you're playing it at speed. If it's pretty seamless, right? Okay, so one more time, using everything we've learned today, it should sound and look a little something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Down, down, up, down, 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 up, down, 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 or down, down, up, down, change, down, up, down, change, down. Change. Just keep going like that. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed your first guitar lesson and that everything we've discussed today makes sense. Like I said, if not, feel free to go back and re-watch certain parts of this video. And as always, go slow and steady, particularly when you're practicing your chord changes. You want to make sure that you're getting smooth transitions between each chord, as well as making sure that every string is ringing out nice and cleanly on each chord. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Thank you for watching. That's the end of this video. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like if you enjoyed it or found any of it useful. You might also like to check out some of these videos, and let me know in the comments section below what you'd like to learn next. Until then, I'll see you there.